From ancient fire-spewing weapons to a bell that's been ringing since 1840, these are strange ancient tools that baffle archaeologists. Greek fire was an ancient weapon. It's gonna sound pretty insane when I describe it, but this was 100% real. Used in the Byzantine Empire from the 600s to the 1200s, this weapon was used a lot in naval warfare. You'd have this pipe mounted on ships that sprayed this sticky gel-like substance at enemy vessels, setting them on fire, of course, and this was very effective. The stuff was almost impossible to put out, and it burned even on water, so enemies basically had no chance if they were hit by it. So what was it made of? Well, we don't know. The exact recipe for Greek fire has been lost to history. We know it existed because there are tons of solid records about it, but by the 1300s all mentions just stopped. Some people think the recipe was lost due to the Byzantine Empire's decline or because they lost access to the ingredients as their territories shrank, but based on what's been gathered, it seems like Greek fire was kind of like an ancient version of napalm. It was sticky, super flammable, and next to impossible to extinguish. It's wild that something so effective just disappeared, but some things are better off forgotten. There's no shortage of raging wildfires to battle against today without us adding more fuel to it. The Oxford Electric Bell, also known as the Clandarin Dry Pile, is a bell that's been ringing almost non-stop since 1840. You can find it at the University of Oxford. So how does this thing work? Well, it's made up of two brass bells, a metal clapper, and a thing called a dry pile, basically an old school battery. The dry piles send electric charges back and forth, making the clapper bounce between the bells, ringing them one after the other. This process has been going on though for 180 years without stopping. Sure, it's faint and you can't really hear it because it's behind glass, but it is still ringing. Scientists have no idea exactly what the dry piles are made of, but they're coated with molten sulfur and probably some other unknown materials. The bell will eventually stop when the piles run out of charge. We just don't know when that'll be. And that's why scientists haven't decided to deconstruct the thing. It's been going strong for so long, no one wants to touch it. It's an ongoing experiment being carried out long after the original creators have died, which is pretty amazing. Not only is this a fascinating little piece of history, but it's history that's still in the making. This is one of the oldest ongoing experiments in the world. Take a look at these things. They're called Roman Dodecahedrons. They look like something that belongs in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but these are real ancient artifacts. These strange 12-sided objects made of bronze or stone have been found all across Europe, mostly in places where the Romans had ruled. They're small, about the size of a baseball, and they're decorated with different patterns and shapes on each face. And you could probably guess what I'm about to say here, but nobody really knows what they were used for. Some people think they might have been used as a sort of measuring tool, maybe to calibrate instruments or to help with construction. Others think they could have been used in religious rituals or maybe a game or puzzle. You don't hear that very often when it comes to strange ancient artifacts, but looking at these things, I think there's a very good chance that that was the case. I just imagine if the internet goes down completely and then 2,000 years from now someone digs up a fidget spinner or some other fidget toy with buttons that do absolutely nothing, purely made to fidget with. I could just imagine the migraines they'd have trying to figure that stuff out. The Baghdad Battery, discovered in Iraq in 1936, is an incredibly strange ancient find. It's basically a clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod inside of it. Some archaeologists think it could have just been a container for holding scrolls or whatever else people needed to keep in jars back then, but there are some very odd elements to the thing that make it seem like that may not have been the case. The exciting theory is that this thing could have been an ancient version of a battery. I suppose the name kind of gave that away though. If that is the case, it would mean that there were ancient civilizations who may have figured out how to use electricity long before we thought. And whenever people talk about ancient people coming up with incredible things, aliens inevitably come into the conversation. And I get it, it's a much more tantalizing idea than just ancient people being smarter than we thought they were. So did extraterrestrials visit Earth in the distant past and share some of their knowledge, giving rise to inventions like the Baghdad Battery? Or were these people just way more advanced than we give them credit for? Next, let's talk about these perfectly round stone spheres in Costa Rica. Now that may not sound all that exciting, but I mean, look at these things and then consider the fact we don't really know why or how they were created. A A lot stranger now, isn't it? I mean, what the hell? There are hundreds of these things scattered across the land. Some are huge, almost as tall as an average-sized man, too, and they obviously seem too perfect to be natural. They're smooth and incredibly symmetrical, almost like someone took a giant rock and intentionally shaped it into a ball. But the big question is, well then why? Some people think they could have been used in rituals, which is usually what archaeologists say when they just have no idea what something is. They may have also been markers for something, but we don't really know. Were they just symbolic objects, or did they serve a more practical use that's been lost to time? Whatever the case, they look nice. All these mysterious spheres were found in Otsodal, South Africa, with grooves etched into them. They're known as the Klerksdorp spheres. They're perfectly round and have strange grooves carved into them, and they've been turning up in ancient mining sites that date back thousands of years. What's weird is that these grooves are so symmetrical and precise that they almost look machine-made, which is pretty strange because these things formed long before we had that kind of technology. So some geologists think these spheres aren't as mysterious as they seem though, saying the spheres were formed when minerals naturally built up around a core, kind of like how a pearl forms inside an oyster. Around 3 billion years ago, these little spheres started forming in volcanic mud and rocks, and over time, as the mud and rocks hardened, the sides slowly built up and shaped the spheres. The grooves or lines you see on the surface of the spheres happened because the material they formed in wasn't uniform. Some parts of the material were finer or denser than others, so those areas slowed down the growth of the spheres and caused the grooves to form as they grew. Think of it like trying to roll a ball through a patchy field. Some parts are smooth, others have obstacles causing the ball to form ridges along the way. But not everyone buys this explanation. Some think these things are just too perfect or too unusual to be natural. I mean, one of them just straight up looks like the Death Star. Enter the advanced ancient civilization and ancient alien theories. Regardless though, they're cool looking objects, and the fact that you're looking at something that slowly formed over billions of years is pretty cool. The Piri Reis Map is a map created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, and it shows parts of the world that shouldn't have been known at the time. For example, it includes a detailed image of Antarctica, which was first sighted in 1820. The map is surprisingly accurate, and when historians look at what's left of it, which is only about a third of the original, they're usually pretty impressed. Most agree it just doesn't look like something that could have been made back then. That's led to all sorts of theories. Some people think Piri Reis had access to much older maps, possibly from Atlantis or some lost civilization. The Saqqara Bird is a small wooden artifact found in an ancient Egyptian tomb near Saqqara, dating back to about 2,200 years ago. At first, it looks like a simple bird statue, but take a closer look and you might see it kind of also resembles a model airplane. What's strange is that it has no legs, and its wings are shaped in a way that's different from other bird statues from ancient Egypt. Some people think it could be more than just art. In 1969, an Egyptian doctor named Khalil Messia said the bird might actually be a model of an ancient flying machine. So to test it, people made replicas, and some of them glide pretty well when thrown. Most archaeologists say it was just a toy, but the idea that ancient Egyptians might have known something about flight more than we realize raises some interesting ideas. And honestly, given that we're talking about the ancient Egyptians, I wouldn't necessarily put it past them. The London hammer is a famous out-of-place artifact. In 1936, a couple named Max and Emma Hahn found it while exploring in London, Texas. The hammer was stuck in a rock formation that's estimated to be about 100 million years old. The hammer itself, though, looks surprisingly modern. It has a wooden handle, a metal head made of iron and steel, materials that shouldn't have existed back when the rock was formed. The rock it was found in dates back to the Cretaceous period, when dinosaurs were roaming the earth, long before humans or any advanced tools like this were around. So what's the explanation? Could it be a leftover tool from a future civilization that somehow got stuck in the past? Were hammers like this just invented long before we thought they were? The Antikythera Mechanism is one of the strangest artifacts ever discovered. Some say this basically could have been an ancient version of an analog computer. It was found in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901. It's this complex looking device full of gears that some think could have been used to predict eclipses and track the movement of stars and planets, but this object dates back to around 100 BCE, way more advanced than anything else from that time period. The technology behind it was so sophisticated that no one would make anything like it again until the 14th century. So what happened here? Did ancient civilizations have knowledge that we've lost over time? We still don't know how they made it or why, but the Antikythera Mechanism is one of the most baffling tools in human history. And with all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.